My dear American friends, my dear compatriots, I say my dear compatriots because, as you know, I came with 20 of our compatriots, and I want to mention that we have today 3 of our judges, including our Chief Judge Bernard Stian. Americans have different views on Europe. Some see Europe as a paradise, others as hell. They see Europe as a paradise when the police is British, when the cook are French, when the mechanists are German, when the lovers are Italian, and when everything is organized by the Swiss. They see Europe as hell when the police is German, when the cook are British, when the mechanists are French, when the lovers are Swiss, and when everything is organized by the Italians. I'm here to talk about world governance and international law from the European point of view. I would like you to watch to see that image. That's the very first American treaty. America is becoming a nation, 1778. The French were the first with you. But I'm sorry to say that this time of treaties is over. We are living an extraordinary time. Treaties are declining. Vulgar international law is falling in the oubliette of the history. Everything is becoming firm, is becoming soft, smart, and beautiful. What a wonderful 21st century. The old-fashioned binding international agreements are over, and please, you have to be global everywhere. G7, G8, G20, perhaps G40, why not G193, which is the number of nation-states in the world today. So the question is, have we arrived in the Leibnizian world, in the world of Dr. Pangloss? As you know, Dr. Pangloss is a hero of the French writer Voltaire, who said that all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. The problem is that non-law and world governance is not so good in a nation's life. It is messy, and international organizations suffer from lack of political responsibility. We know that it is often about politics, threats, and traps. It's about uncertainty, far from what we call true law, which is safe and reliable. And as you know, last but not least, it is not binding. Does this mean that everything in nation-states relations has to be ruled by international law? I think no, for 4 reasons. The first is because of sovereignty, which is, after all, the #1 among all freedoms. Europeans, and I want to say this today, Europeans still like sovereignty. And please remember that the theorist #1 of sovereignty was Jean Bodin, who was French. And I will explain later about the European model and sovereignty. 2, because treaties are not necessarily successful. As Europeans, we can tell you a little about that. We heard about international law in 1990, and everyone knows that the Treaty of Versailles was partly a mistake and made nothing but revenge and German invasions for 20 years later. We also heard about international law when we had the Yalta Conference, as you know, which was founded on the rule of law, and which did not succeed better for freedom and the respect of the law. Just ask Germans who lived behind the Berlin Wall for almost 30 years. Point 3, because not everything can be said in international law process. Treaties are binding agreements. Nation needs some free space to speak together. And 4, because non-binding discussions between nations and soft law may be appropriate to the quest of common values. So, from the European point of view, I would say that world governance is not so good and not so bad. Now, what about Europe and international law? I think the example of Europe has to be mentioned because it is probably very unique in the history of the human world. As the ECG said in Simmental, the European community constitutes a new legal order of international law, for the benefit of which the member states have limited their sovereign rights within limited fields. But what is unique, I think, is integrations of different countries, very different countries, not by politics, not by power, but by the rule of law. And our founding fathers were wise enough to know that Europe, and you know this, had a very long, complex, and bloody history between nations who were very different. And Europe would have never existed through political process, through common defense, but only through European law. And European law is international law. Market integration, freedom for economy, welfare, peace, cooperation, war on terror, free movement of goods, free establishment, free movement of person, everything was done and made through the rule of law. And I think what is interesting for you today, for American lawyer, is the very specific nature of EU law. EU law is international law, but it is a new legal order, just for one reason, because EU law is integrated into our national orders. EU law has a direct legal effect. It is not like treaties binding nations only. EU law is first. That's the primacy of EU law, and has direct effect on domestic legal orders. Our governments, our parliaments, our national courts in the 27 countries have the obligation to enforce European law. If they do not, EU Commission and the court in Luxembourg will be there and will sanction. Now, and this is my last point, did such an international law lead to European governance, to a kind of United States of Europe, as Victor Hugo and Jean Monnet dreamt about? I think 50 years later we have to say no. Yes, we have the European institutions, we have the Commission, the Parliament, and the European Council. And yes, as you know, the Lisbon Treaty, which should enter into force very soon, is improving the political dimension of Europe very much and creating a president of the European Council who will be, nobody knows who he will be, but he will be one face and one voice for Europe. And yes, law is dedicated to implemental political purposes, but we have no federal government, and Europe is not about politics first. I emphasize this again. It's not about defense first. It's about law. It's about integration by the law. And that integration, I mentioned this, made a prosperity and peace for us. I would like to end with two remarks. The first is that liberal Europeans, and when I say liberal, it's on a philosophical acceptance. You know that in our countries, liberal means about the opposite than in your country. Liberal Europeans cherish sovereignty. We do cherish sovereignty and independence. We share a part of the American skepticism about international law and world governance. But we need international law, especially regarding the Europe-making process. Now, I would like to leave you with two faces. I could have chosen these faces, but they are young presidents, and we need to know more about them, I think. I prefer these two presidents. If you look at them, I think it's important because you see them as one very American and the other one very French. One seen as a very conservative from Europe, the other one seen as a socialist dealing with communists. These are two wrong views. Actually, they were not so far away from each other, quite friendly at the time. President Reagan loved French traditions, and President Mitterrand knew American culture very well. He lived the Second World War, and he was grateful to the Americans as all Europeans are. Anyway, these two presidents, I think, loved their countries very deeply, and they did build real and sincere international dialogue. But this man believed in one fundamental value, a value that we share and we cherish, a value which is first, a value whose name is freedom. And this will be my last word about international relations, governance and law. These presidents knew that the glory of nations is not in power or prestige, in wealth or in strength, but in the capacity to make the people free, living in peace and pursuing happiness. They also knew, and this is, I think, a strong message to us in 2009, because till today, maybe especially today, international law might not prevail. They also knew that the future of the world, as President Reagan said, the future of the world does not belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave. Thank you.